Welcome everybody. This is Philippa Smethurst, who is presenting us today with 20 ways to break free from trauma, and it's really an introduction to Philippa's new book. So I just want to welcome you, Philippa. How are you?
I'm very well, Amanda. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great
Oh,
delight.
you're welcome. You're welcome. So I'm just going to spotlight your video so we can see you now, and we're currently seeing your presentation as well. So if
Cool.
you want to take it away, Philippa, we'll talk for a while and then there'll be a chance just for a Q&A towards the end.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you very much to Clive. My first connection with Action Trauma Network was back in April when I contacted Clive, and I felt very attracted to the modality for the ideas behind Action Trauma Network, particularly linking to connection and compassion. I thought that this might fit with my own ideas. I wrote to Clive because, in fact, there's a Northern Ireland connection in my book at one point with Mary McAleese, the former president. So she tells a story, and I heard her tell this story live, and she's given me permission to put it in the book, about her own father, who was called Patrick Lenigan, who was on the Falls Road, and when there was a bomb, came out to save a young woman who died in his arms. And from that moment onwards, for many years, did not speak. He only sighed in front of the fire. Eventually, he did speak again, and Mary asked him, "Do you remember anything about that day?" And he said these words: "Who was I to say that there was anything wrong with me?" And Mary makes the point that she's so common with psychological pain that there's a kind of hierarchy of pain. We pay attention to physical pain, but maybe we devalue what's way down inside of us. I sometimes call that going down the lift shaft to find the hidden tentacles of trauma, which are in the mind and the body. What's hidden, what's forgotten, what's dismissed may be very important to know about and bring to the surface. The first working title for my book was Trauma, an Inside Job or an Inside Story. And the publishers didn't go with that title. But I really think the inside nature is so important. The other motivation was something about our whipped up society. I wonder if our whipped up society goes against this going inside and noticing trauma. I think there's a pressing need to apply the brakes. I had a client who said that she just wanted to go somewhere so her feathers could go down. And so many I speak to really do resonate with that idea. But we get locked into our trauma responses. And trauma can be very elusive. The war correspondent, Lindsay Hilson, says it's not it's what we forget in trauma that's so important. And I have some of that in my own story. When I was a young woman in 1989, I was in China teaching university students. And in June of that year, the tanks from the government came in to crush the hopes and the dreams of those students, and in some cases, their lives. Not my students, but because my students were in another city, but their siblings and friends had their dreams crushed. And I remember sitting with them. I remember the power of their raw emotions making such a hallmark on me, because of course trauma is catchy. But I don't think I fully realized until recently, all these 30, 40 years later, how important that experience was to me, and also what humans are capable of. The book really began during the first lockdown, when I noticed when that unseen, unknown threat came towards us, ever closer, what variety of responses we had, from anxiously washing lemons and thinking that the pandemic was in the paving slabs, to acting as if there was no threat to us whatsoever. So I started to write an article about trauma responses. It seemed an appropriate response to an existential crisis. And the article grew over the next 3 years, 4 years into this book. And during that time, I've had a ringside view in observing trauma symptoms and how one pocket of trauma within us can be activated. With myself, I don't mind saying that my own struggle has been to manage the sense of urgency that I've had. And actually, that's the first chapter of my book, Trauma Takes Us Over. So what is trauma? I go with Gabor Mate's definition. Trauma shakes us up like this Coke bottle. Life cuts across us, something extraordinary happens, and it's the fizz that comes. What do we do with the fizz? Not everything that's bad traumatizes us. It's what's left over. It's the fizz and where it makes its way into our minds and bodies, affecting our beliefs and our abilities to cope. Of course, we know that the trauma could be an outside event, a terrorist attack, or a fire that changes everything from then on. Or, of course, it can be the slow drip, drip, cumulative trauma, when we're not properly, when our needs are not properly met and we're not properly loved. Chronic trauma, easily missed. And there are many in our world who do not feel safe, maybe don't even know that they don't feel safe. Now, I have a neighbor who is very good at anagrams, and he has come up with this anagram for trauma. Am-a-rut. It's so good, isn't it? I'd never heard of that before. But when we're locked into our trauma responses and our beliefs that possibly, of course, are not to do with reality, but are to do with our bodies and minds trying to save us from more pain and protect us from the wounds that we carry, it's a kind of rut, but it is a powerful rut, as we well know. Of course, underneath the rut, the powerful trauma responses, are the wounds. Now, my book really is a pick and mix. I'll come to a little bit more about that in a minute. It's full of information and a myriad of ways to pay attention and to bring back online the thinking brain. It's been proved that meditation, if done over time, shrinks the amygdala. So one size does not fit all with paying attention. And of course, with our clients, we may be stuck in a rut, but there's a part of us that maybe longs to be free and longs for a kinder way. So I think that information matters, and not everybody has it. There's a woman called Sally Donovan who wrote a book, No Matter What, about adopting her children. And her younger child was left in a car seat for many hours and was very disturbed and would shout obscenities in her face. She, as an adoptive parent, had no idea what was going on. She felt buzzing with trauma activation. And she also felt exhausted and numb. She went to a social work conference, and the social worker spoke to her, or spoke to the group. And he said, "You are not the person you were. The trauma has made its way into you." And what she said was that information about her son's trauma making its way into her felt like a bullseye of empathy that arrived right in the center of her forehead. And she wept. She felt so relieved. So I think the bullseye of empathy takes us a very long way, but we do need the information. I'm going to move, of course, I should say, of course, that this life trauma picture here isn't really correct, because the trauma is not the ball, the wrecking ball. The trauma is what's inside of us. Now, my colleague, Sue Wright, you will have come across the window of tolerance, Dan Siegel's idea of the window of tolerance. My colleague here, Sue Wright, has developed this trauma thermometer. It's a very useful tool and clients love it. The idea of the too much and the too little, going back to the inner rut. What does the mind and the body do? It either becomes hypervigilant, and we know those kinds of symptoms. My head is buzzy, my body is jumpy, too much feeling. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Or, of course, going under the radar. And the work of Stephen Porges shows us so much about that aspect of trauma, not just dissociation, where we feel a distance between us and the world, but that other dorsal vagal shutdown, where we just can't get off the sofa. And of course, where we'd like to be is in the middle, in the green zone, where we feel calm and awake and can think and feel in just the right space. Now, I was hoping when I did my book that I could use this sculpture as the front cover, but because it's a book for a general audience, the publishers didn't want to use this abstract concept. That would be more appropriate for, they said, for an academic book. But I love this sculpture because I think this sculpture really shows us the too much of trauma. When we are so hypervigilant and alert to danger. People in war zones, of course, don't even hear the gunfire. They're more in the blue zone. But when we're whipped up, it can feel rather like this. Somebody from the James Foley Foundation, who'd been held captive by ISIS, said, "When we're in danger, the brain has two switches, one for survival and one for comfort." Of course, the green zone is the comfort. But this red zone is a response to trauma. It's a solution. It's our mind and body's way of taking us away from an experience that's too much for us. And of course, it traps us in cycles. That's another reason why I like the sculpture, because it shows us the triggering cycles that we know so well with working with our clients. Joe Yelverton, who's in my book, survived an avalanche, and he has talked about his story so beautifully over the radio. He was enthralled to his flashbacks, which I call little slithers of pain that come back. He was enthralled to this for 20 years, and the flashbacks got more and more out of control. He was caught in a destructive cycle. He described it as a rogue video recorder, taking him over more and more. And then, of course, became now. When we're in a destructive loop like that, we don't see ourselves as others see us. We're only compelled to act in a certain way. In my book, there's a story about Raphael in the first chapter, who suffered terrible violence and terror as a child and then became a war reporter, addicted to danger. But this is the tricky bit. The war reporting was a ticket out of trauma. Why? Well, because back then he felt so powerless. Being able to report on gunfire and terrible experiences gave him a sense of agency. Another symptom of somebody in the red zone would be that they might be very much in denial of reality. And of course, cortisol is addictive. Their brain says, just do one thing, and that leads to another. And also the brain circuitry can change. They're locked in. A client might show up in the red zone having a wall of words. I remember saying to a client who had such a presentation, who was so breathless with telling their story, that I felt overwhelmed, plastered to the back wall. And at the end of the first session, I said, because it had been so vivid, that I felt as though they were a runaway truck without brakes, because that was the image I had. The client broke down in tears. It was painful, but they needed to see that truth. We may work with people who are always on attack or defense, unable to see another person's pain. But you think in our world today, there are so many racked up in red zone that they're unable to connect to somebody else's pain because they're so full of their own pain. They may metaphorically or actually have their hands over their ears. Another aspect of this red zone may be rigidity of thinking, unable to see nuance or subtlety, or latching onto a truth like a limpet onto a rock. There's a story in the book about a woman called Pretty, who's terrified that her daughter will be taken away into intensive care. And she holds on to the hospital trolley. She cannot tolerate another way of thinking other than the fear-induced trauma. So how might we work with red zone in the therapy room? We might notice the bodily signs, agitation, narrow focus, change of facial tone, and the breathing may be shallow. I've worked with many clients who in the first session have twitchy legs. I wonder if you have. It's like their legs are saying they want to get out of here. I heard a woman who has an 8-year-old child, adoptive child, who's stuck in fight and flight, who says that she can't wear tights. Why? Because the tights trap her legs. She could wear leggings and socks, but not tights. Trauma logic. I'm trained in sensory motor psychotherapy. I love sensory motor psychotherapy. It puts the body first. And there are great tools that Janina Fisher and Pat Ogden help us with to track the body, to notice where the agitation is, and use top-down interventions to soothe and reduce the activation. And also to find the place in the body that may wish to speak. It takes a long time to do this. Before we get to do that, we may need to just join the dance of the client in their overwhelm, and then see if we can find a way to open up to curiosity and go down the lift shaft, if only for a couple of minutes, with mindful approaches. and always understanding that the survival defenses are a solution. The client does not know how to do differently, but they may be open to think about, would you like to feel differently? Building an alliance with the client. What is the effect of the way that you are on other people? Notice the behaviors. Often the behaviors will have a value added, turbocharged element. A client who may have a compulsion to look after others with no sense of their own needs and very fuzzy boundaries. Externally orientated, anxious to please, trapped and locked into doing more and more, and maybe also suffering from a chronic illness of the immune system. I am very happy to talk to you about structural dissociation model, parts. Working with parts is a wonderful modality for trauma. At the Janina Fisher, we spoke about the Janina Fisher Masters Trauma Conference in Oxford. I learned about this Diddy doll. This Diddy doll was developed by a woman called Karen Andor. Somebody called it a gingerbread man, a stale gingerbread man, but it's nothing like that. It's very beautiful and it has a velour cover. And this represents this outer doll, the going on with ordinary life, as Janina calls it, the going on with ordinary life. I will talk about the parts in between in a minute. But this doll is a way to contact the vulnerability of clients. So they will be able to recognize the fight, the flight, the freeze part, and the flop part, the part that goes under the radar. And last, the vulnerable self. I'm going to hold this vulnerable self here because I think that can be so important. Clients love the idea of this, many of them. They can see the idea that they have a vulnerable part that needs to be connected with down the lift shaft. And we can find ways to somatically go down that lift shaft. I sometimes think of it as going down a funnel. In order to do that, of course, we need to listen to the backstory underneath the presentation. What is the trauma belief? And what is it that the vulnerable part inside might be just the grumbling in the gut? What would it say if it could speak? Many clients might say, once we go down the funnel with mindfulness, what about me? Or see me, or notice me. A plea that's very short and comes straight from the vulnerable self. So that's enough about the red zone. I would like to maybe just show you a couple of exercises from the book that may help with red zone activation. So first, a very simple breath practice. Imagine a child's slide. Imagine ascending the steps of the slide as you take in regular sips of breath. And then once you've filled your lungs to the top, you allow yourself a very long exhale. Push your breath as far as you can along the flat slide to reach right to the end. Taking breathing space is such an antidote to the too much, to the overwhelm of trauma. The second exercise is called surrender to gravity. Rest your body on the ground or on your chair with your legs stretched out. Find exactly the right way for you. Take a little time to properly arrive in your body for a moment. Adjust your position to make yourself super comfortable. Imagine your body is making an imprint on warm sand. What would it look like? As you imagine this, feel the weight of your body sinking lower, really being supported from underneath. Gently roll your head from one side to another, taking time to stop in the middle. Surrender to gravity. Gravity is my best friend, always present, always available, always ready to respond. Gravity is holding me, letting me sink, and absorbing all my stress downwards. Thank you. And before we move on to the too little of trauma, which is the next slide, I'd like to simply offer you a little meditation called Clearing the Space. This is an excellent meditation to do for somebody who's simply got too much going on. They can go back to it and repeat it. Imagine yourself at the edge of a room with a huge pile of parcels and boxes in the middle. They're all connected with you. As you take stock, notice how many there are and any feelings that you might have about this. Choose one parcel to look at slowly and deliberately, and then get up, approach the parcel, bend down, pick it up, and take it to the edge of the room. As you lay it down, acknowledge that the parcel is important and you'll return to it later. Then repeat the same process with all the parcels in the room until you've cleared the space in the center of the room. Notice any changes in your physical sensations or breathing as you do so. And reflect on what is important now. So moving on, if we may, to the next slide, which is another of my friend's sculptures. This, of course, is the blue zone, the other end of the thermometer. And of course, we are reminded here, aren't we, of, as I've mentioned earlier, the Stephen Porges research on the dorsal vagal nerve that kicks in extremis. The same for mammals. Think of a gazelle in the savannah that's chased by the lion. In extremis, it will feign dead. It will faint in order to escape the lion. And this is so important to understand for trauma, victims of trauma who may have suffered rape, been abducted and haven't been able to fight. But of course, this state is a way of saving them. It's their bodies kicking in to save to save us in extremis. Of course, if we stay in this position, we are more vulnerable, because if more danger comes along, we're unable to respond. Now, I'd like to just speak about the blue zone a little bit more and how it might show up with clients. We may be sometimes very critical of those who don't seem to care much or be apathetic about important things. But their lack of responsiveness may be to do with huge upset and overload. This can be missed. And going under the radar can become a way of feeling pointless, hopeless, as a response to the world, but underneath the wound is often hurt. I had a client who felt totally periphery in their household, the cherry on the cake. The whole family dominated by a very disturbed older brother. And my client felt frightened and also didn't feel he had a right to exist in the world. He wouldn't even meet my eye contact, meeting me in the lobby with his head turned away, and very surprised that I noticed it. But over time and consistent and relentless attention to his inner world, he now greets me with a spark in his eye. This therapy has shown him that he has worth. It's taken a great deal of time. Of course, it can be more tricky when clients are actively defended against care and goodness. So sometimes GPs call such clients heart sink patients. They can be labelled as having resistant depression. They may respond to everything with a version of "I can't." And of course, as practitioners, we may get frustrated. We may feel we want to kickstart them. We may pick up some buried fury that they're not able to articulate. I worked with somebody like this who was so defended and attacking of the process that I would have that heart sink for 2 years. But the good news was, eventually, she got to go down the funnel and found her vulnerable self. But it took a long, long time. I believe that what makes the difference is relentless curiosity about beliefs that might not really fit with reality. Somebody who feels deeply ashamed about their trauma. That's a trauma symptom. It's chapter 15 of my book, how shame blocks anything else. It's like Velcro, it sticks to itself, but it stops us from grieving. I met a man who was ashamed because of the suicide of his brother. Didn't make logical sense, but that was how he felt, and he couldn't grieve. It trapped him. So let's develop an alliance and notice what is. As Janina Fisher says, the present is all we have. Go down the lift shaft. Allow the client to hang around with their vulnerability and, of course, their body, and to treat their vulnerable self with respect. I sometimes have had clients who walk around with this vulnerable self as if in a papoose in between sessions. It might take them a very long time to see that. The way in may be to see a rescue dog on the television and care about that before they're able to go inside and connect with their own vulnerability. It can be very hard to be with somebody who's under the radar, but I think empathy will take us a very long way. And also to come back to the body. I just read you a little exercise that you may enjoy from the book. It's called gratitude exercise. By the way, a smile takes us a very, very long way. It floods with positive hormones, serotonin, dopamine. So I should smile more in my presentation. Gratitude exercise. Begin by looking around your immediate environment and gently noticing something that pleases you. Hold your attention on this pleasing object as you consider how wonderful, beautiful, or useful it is. Notice every detail about the scene carefully, and maybe try and take a picture in your memory of the scene so that you can recall it later. And as you focus on its qualities for longer, notice if your positive feelings about it increase. Though you may feel down, dull, colourless, try using your imagination to connect to brightness, beauty, and power. Imagine the sun is hiding behind a cloud and allow your mind to connect to that idea while taking some mindful breaths in and out. Practice trusting its power for good and enjoy connecting with it. And imagine that flow of sunshine coming right into you. Another aspect of trauma that really connects to me is how trauma breaks our hearts. Van Gogh, in the 1890 lithograph, drew a picture of a man with his head forward in a chair, weeping. And apparently he said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I think that our hearts are broken by trauma. And it's very important to remind ourselves of this as we ask our clients, what is our deep trouble? And of course, if we've had developmental trauma, we will be most raw. I also have a very particular interest in loneliness as a consequence of trauma. I did some short videos on YouTube, and one was on loneliness. And somebody wrote a comment anonymously, "I've always felt alone." That really impacted me. Because I think if we don't understand trauma, we will judge people and then they will feel more alone. These tentacles of trauma get to such strange places within us, and we need to open wide our imagination to think about trauma, what beliefs we might hold, where we might be holding it in our bodies, in our posture, and to keep faith with someone else, whether we're their therapist, loved one, or friend. I'm every day in my work, impacted by this, which is a giant scallop sculpture on the beach in Aldborough in Suffolk, and the words are from Benjamin Britten's opera, Peter Grimes. And it really captures my thoughts as a trauma therapist about trauma. I hear those voices that will not be drowned. There are so many in our society who have intersecting needs and challenges. They may fall through the cracks of what's available. Trauma treatment is patchy. Trauma, they may have psychiatric diagnoses, but trauma might be at the heart of things and not acknowledged. I've worked with many people with personality disorders who, when we work with the trauma, no longer have those diagnoses. You may ask, can we move on from trauma? Well, I think we can. What helps us dissipate trauma? The jam jar on the right is the trauma is represented by the ball. We don't have any space. We're only reactive. If we see the middle jar, there's a little bit more space, a little bit more thinking, a little bit more space to reflect and dissipate. On the left jar, or it may be on the right on your screens, we have still got the trauma at the bottom, but so much more to allow in, to dissipate, to let in the good. I believe that for trauma treatment, we need a buffet of options and help and a lot more understanding. With physical trauma, if you go to Heathrow Airport, you may see something called a trauma kit. You have an elastopast, syringe, scissors, trauma blanket, very physical things. But what do we need for psychological trauma? I believe we need a lot of practical things as well. We need rhythm, repetition, reflection, and to remind our bodies that they're safe. But these practices need to be returned to. They can only be tolerated for a short time to start with. A little bit goes a long way. Ultimately, though, I do believe there's hope. Post-traumatic growth is the subject of the last chapter of my book. And it is the longest chapter, and it should be. Because if we move away from our trauma, if we allow other things in, it changes us, it transforms us. I've seen this in so many people. We may need psychological weight training every day to still regulate and to still treat ourselves and others with loving kindness. But we may have more resolve. We may think we really want to focus on something that's very important, and that might give us a deeper appreciation for life itself, so that we become rather like a Kintsugi jar that's broken, a Japanese jar. We become complete and remolded, but the broken parts have gold, a scaffolding of support, both internally and connecting to the good in the world. Thank you very much for listening.